Boy, I don't know about you. I feel like falling asleep now. Nice lazy song and some of those videos of those animals. It's like, yeah, that was probably me when I hit the snooze 11 times this morning, something like that. Well, I do want to welcome you back to this series, and we are talking about laziness today, and we've been talking about these things with the idea of self-portraits. What are those paints? What are those brushes that we paint our own pictures with? Those character qualities that become who we are, what we see when we look in the mirror. And are they really what we want to look like? Well, I have a treat for you this morning because we have a portrait today, and I think it actually is a portrait of you. No, not the person sitting on your left, not the person sitting on your right. Actually, this one looks just like you. And if I'm honest with you, it looks just like me too. Are you anxious? Okay, your hype is probably a little bit too high, but let me show you what we've got. This is our self-portraits. Now I know what you're thinking. That doesn't actually look like any of us, does it? But let me tell you a story, and as you hear this story, look at this picture and see if you begin to recognize a little bit of yourself. The story goes that there was a grasshopper one fine summer's day, a warm afternoon, lazing about, reclining, just chirping and singing to his heart's content. He'd built himself a nice hammock out of a leaf, and he was finally able to just relax. And as he's relaxing, an ant walks up. And the ant is carrying a heavy load, grain that he's gathering to bring back to the colony in the anthill. And as he walks by, the grasshopper lazily calls out to him, "Ant, come and join me. Why not relax in the summer sun instead of working so hard your entire life?" To which the ant responds, "Well, I'm storing up food for the winter, and I would suggest that you do the same." The grasshopper just laughed at him. "For the winter? That's a long ways off, and we have plenty of food right now." And so he went on sleeping, and the ant went on working. When the winter came, the grasshopper discovered that he had no food to eat. And as he was starving to death, he noticed that, unlike him, the ants had gathered enough food and now were sharing the corn, the grain, and all of the things that they had prepared for the winter. That was when the grasshopper learned that it's better to be prepared for the days ahead. Well, let's be honest, that sounds pretty good, doesn't it? I don't know about you, but there are times where I absolutely feel that way. I don't want to work. I just want to bang on my drums all day. Just relax. And listen, I don't want you to hear today that rest is bad, because rest is good. In fact, the Bible talks about that, how we need that time when we can relax, when we can set aside moments to recuperate, to rejuvenate, to get replenished for the work that we do have to do. In fact, there's a verse in the book of Proverbs, and the book of Proverbs is really a collection of wisdom sayings, things that God handed to his people and said, if you want life to go well, here are some easy sayings that will help you out. And this is one that I just think is perfect for this. It says, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. Oh, you guys still here? Okay. All right, well, let's keep going then, because I may have just found my favorite verse, right? So let's see what he says next, because this seems pretty good. I could roll with this. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall your poverty come on you like a prowler, and your need like an armed man. Okay, that is not what we would expect to see next, right? But here's the deal. This is essentially God giving us a parental warning about laziness. A lot of times when you read the Bible, sometimes it's hard to get a sense of what exactly God is working on, what he's teaching us, what he's telling us. But a lot of these passages bring a couple of things together. On one hand, there will be a warning, but on another hand, there will be a promise. And you think about if you've had kids as you raise them, or if you're in charge of somebody in the workplace, you give them these kinds of warnings, right? Listen, if we don't do what needs to be done, we're not going to like where we end up. Right? That idea of sleep, essentially, you fall asleep on the job, and you're going to end up missing out on that preferred future that you hoped was coming. And so God is giving us this kind of warning against laziness. How do we replace laziness with diligence? That's really what the story of the grasshopper and the ant is all about. Right? The grasshopper's relaxation isn't necessarily a bad thing, but what happens when that relaxation becomes the only thing? That everything I'm driving for is to try to get that moment where I don't have to do anything anymore. Or where it keeps me from ever starting because I don't want to do anything in the first place. I remember, this is silly, but as a kid, so before I even had a career, as a kid, I would think about retirement. I know, right? Because that's the rest part, right? And there's going to be this horrible season of life in between where I have to work, but then someday when I retire, I could just play video games all day. I mean, think how fast that would get old. But for a lot of us, we think that way. Everything I do is to try to get to the moment where I can finally quit doing stuff. There's something lazy in that. And sometimes we think about the other things that we're talking about in this series, they can seem a lot more dangerous than laziness. Like what Chad talked about last week, wrath that leads to murder, greed, lust, laziness. I mean, it's annoying, right? Especially if I'm working hard and that guy's being lazy. But here's the thing. In the picture of the grasshopper, laziness robs us of the better future that God had prepared for us. Right? Laziness doesn't want to admit that there's going to be pain because of this someday. And sometimes it's just because we don't care. That's lazy. Sometimes it's because we're afraid. There's something out there that we wish we had, but we don't know how to get there. Or we're afraid that the work is going to be too hard. Or we're afraid that we'll put this work in and we won't get where we thought we were going to go, and so we just don't even try. That's lazy. Now, I don't know about a lot of you. Some of you I know well enough to know that you're really more like the ant. As you hear me tell the story and you look for yourself, you say, yeah, I know that grasshopper's got a problem. I'm the ant. I'm a hard worker. I always have been. I worked hard in school. I got my degree. I started a business, and I've been building that business, and I work hard every day. You don't have to tell me you got to work hard to make things work out. But think about it this way. Is it possible that you're not just the grasshopper or the ant, but that there might actually be places where you're a little bit of both? Maybe you're an ant at work, but a grasshopper in personal relationships. An ant at work, but a grasshopper in your marriage. A grasshopper with your kids. An ant at work, maybe a grasshopper in your relationship with God. When I was first on the team here at Horizon, I went to Pastor Doug's Tuesday morning group where essentially they were taking a biblical approach to really how to be a man. How to be a good father, how to be a good husband, how to raise your kids, how to point them to the kinds of things that God would teach them for their lives. And what was really interesting to me, I think even the first week that I was there, I was talking to another guy, and he was, a couple decades further than me into life's journey. And what he told me was that these couple of years that he'd spent in that group, man, he wished he had them 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Because he had spent so much energy, so much work on his career while neglecting his family. And that he had felt just so much regret from that because he hadn't put the time in to get to the future that he wanted in those relationships. And so that's why he was here now, sort of trying to make up for lost time. That's the warning that God is kind of giving us in this passage. And I think that's why for Doug's group and here this morning, we want to take a biblical approach to this. Because we want more than somebody that just says, well, if you don't want to be lazy, then just work harder. Thank you for coming. We'll see you back next week for more self-portrait. There's got to be more to this than that. And God wants to give us more to this. So what he gives us in Proverbs 6, as he paints that picture, if you actually look at the verses that come before the ones we've already read, the ant is actually coming right out of the book of Proverbs. It says in these verses, "Go to the ant, you sluggard." Now, sluggard there is not like home runs. Sluggard is a lazy person. Right? Somebody who does not care what's going on about them, doesn't care how it's going to hurt them or how it's going to hurt others, because they don't feel like helping, they don't feel like doing anything. God says, "Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, which having no captain, overseer, or ruler, provides her supplies in the summer and gathers her food in the harvest. How long will you slumber, O sluggard? When will you rise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep? So shall your poverty come on you like a prowler, and your need like an armed man." That idea is that if we don't work hard in our careers, right, if we take shortcuts because we want to make a little more money a little bit faster, we start to undermine our honesty, our integrity, even our friendships to try to make that happen. If this happens in our relationships, if it even happens in our pursuit of an understanding of God, what we find out is that we're surprised by the poverty that comes. When we get to that future moment and realize, like the grasshopper, I'm empty. I'm coming up empty. I'm missing out. And when I fall asleep on the job, then I miss out on the future that could have been there for me. I find myself in financial, relational, even spiritual poverty. But to avoid financial, relational, and spiritual poverty, this proverb is going to give us one big lesson: be an ant in a grasshopper world. Don't fall asleep on the job. Don't miss out on what could be coming. Prepare for that future. Be an ant in a grasshopper world. And so we're going to learn 3 life lessons from this bug's life. And the first one is this: you've got to learn who to go to. Learn who to go to. Now, what's really interesting here, you say, well, why the ant? Well, this is just right in nature. So as familiar as we are with this story, literary scholars believe that actually this piece of Proverbs chapter 6, was the first time that anybody had put to paper what kind of everybody knows about the ant and said, use this as an example for what diligence looks like. Apply this to yourself. Watch what happens in nature and learn from it. And so the version I gave you that includes the grasshopper is sort of an expansion of that we find in Aesop's fables. I mean, we find it in a number of different cultures where that story has come to be. Now, that's one of the things that I think is really cool about the Bible, because if I believe that God is real, if I believe that God gives truth, if I believe that God puts His truth into this book, if all truth is God's truth, then it would make sense that I could go into nature, see something like this, and learn something from it, right? Well, that's exactly what God is saying here. You want to know what it looks like to work hard? Well, I gave you a perfect example. Literally, just walk outside and you'll see it. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise. So this is God's suggestion. You see, it's more than just try harder. Because part of the problem with laziness, right, is even if we know what we need to do, there's something that keeps us from doing it. So He doesn't just say, look at the ant. She works hard. Yeah, she does. What is your point? Right? No. Go to the ant. Consider her ways. Study it. Take it in. Watch closely. That's what that word means. And be wise. When the Bible talks about wisdom, it's not just knowledge. It's not just a thought process. It's active. That now that you've considered it, now that you've gone to the ant, learned from the ant, consider it, you can actually do this yourself. Now, we're familiar with this in our lives, right? You want to get to a preferred future? You want to find somebody who knows how to get there. Right? You want to find the expert, the person who knows how to get where you want to be. Sports fans out here, NBA fans, this is why Kobe Bryant will tell you he watched hours and hours and hours of Michael Jordan's little post-up fadeaway jump shot, because he knew that Michael Jordan was the best and he wanted to be able to do it that way. He would watch hours, and then he would practice and tape himself and compare the tapes and watch again and practice again. Go into the ant. In fact, if you put tape of Jordan next to Julius Erving, you'll see that Jordan